All right, let's bring her in. She is one of the judges on the syndicated 3-judge panel show Hot Bench. It is her first appearance on this podcast. I'm excited to have her on. It is Judge Rachel Juarez. Rachel, thanks
Hi,
for
how are
coming
you?
on.
Anytime. You say it's my first appearance. It is not my first viewing of your podcast.
Well,
I am
thank
a
you.
longtime viewer, so I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to immediately, before we start getting into the Devon stuff and what's happening with Golden Bachelorette, I immediately wanted to just get into you and your background, because the television show is something that I think when people watch judge television shows, they think they're watching actors play judges. And obviously, for people that don't know, I mean, you're not an actor, you're not an actress. And I really want you to lay out your background, where you went to school and what you did to become where you're at right now in the judicial system.
Sure. So sometimes when people are watching these shows, they are watching actors. That's pretty common in our field. But our show, Hot Bench, Judge Judy, some of the more popular ones, they're completely real. These are all real litigants who have cases pending in a court somewhere in the country that have decided to come and appoint us as their arbitration panel. So instead of having a trial in court, they basically agree to arbitration and agree that our decision will be binding. We are not actors. We are arbitrators. So there's 3 of us on the panel. I went to college. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to Yale University for college. And then I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I went to Stanford Law School. And then I moved back down to LA to start practicing law. And I've been practicing law for about, 14 years. And I'm not a sitting judge in a Los Angeles Superior Court, but I have training to be a temporary judge in the Los Angeles Superior Court. And arbitrators, which is what we technically are, do not need to be appointed judges. So what I did was I spent a lot of time doing business litigation, representing companies like Samsung, Google, Mattel in big trials. And then when I had my children, I decided that that was a little much for me. And so I went into family law and I started doing basically high net worth divorces in Los Angeles. And a lot of those divorces involved people in Hollywood. And I got a call about 3 years ago from a producer asking if I was interested in trying out for a judge show, because I had clients who said, my divorce lawyer would be great for this when they were looking for a judge. So I tried out, and the rest is kind of history. There are 3 judges on our panel. 2 of us are lawyers who are appointed arbitrators with some type of judicial-esque training. And then our 3rd judge was a sitting judge for over 20 years in New York. And he retired and then became a judge on our panel. So it's all real. Everything you're seeing is real. None of it's scripted. And the best proof of that is we never stopped filming during COVID. And we never stopped filming during the writer's strike because we don't have writers. So, we write things down, we write notes, but it's all real. No actors, no actresses, and we're trained lawyers.
So this may seem like a stupid question, but since you said you're an arbitrator and you're not a sitting judge, is it wrong of me to call you Judge Rachel Juarez?
I usually tell people don't call me judge when I'm not on the show. But no, it's not wrong. I mean, people, when we're doing press for the show, everybody refers to us as judges, and we are judges on the show. But that's why you see my name is Rachel Juarez. Sort of when I'm not sitting on the bench on the show, it's just Rachel. It's good.
Had you watched Hot Bench before they came to you?
I had, of course. Okay. I had been sort of a casual viewer, but what's funny, my sister was a huge fan of the show. So when I called her and told her I got this strange phone call, she couldn't believe it. She said, I watch that show every day. She's a doctor. And we're big in hospitals and waiting rooms because we're on channels like Channel 2 in Los Angeles, where, the places that are just running basic broadcast television have us on all day long. So it's fun. It's really great.
When it came along, did you have any trepidations about getting into TV? Did you think, I don't know if I want to go this route? Or you were just like, absolutely, I want to do this?
So absolutely, I was not convinced I wanted to do it. At first, it didn't seem real. I was kind of wondering, is this a joke? What's going on? And I had just had my 3rd baby. So I was kind of relaxing from a C-section. And, I still looked like I was pregnant. I was 4 weeks postpartum. And I thought, God, I really don't want to be on TV. It's really not for me. But when I tried out with the judges that are now on the show with us, it was so much fun. We had so much fun during the auditions. And I realized I had kind of lost a little bit of the joy in practicing law over the years. And this was something that like was fun again. So I said, you know what, I'll deal with the fact that it's on TV so that I get to do this. And I always tell people I would probably like my job a tiny bit more if we just went and did it and it didn't air on television, but there probably wouldn't be a market for that. So I kind of take the TV with it as an okay side effect of doing something I love.
So the really cool thing is you reached out to me last week to just say you appreciated my coverage of the Devon story. And I did as well as I could, not knowing a ton about the legal side of everything. But I knew once I was tipped off to, as I had mentioned when I did my video, back in May, I was originally told this guy had a restraining order against him back in college. And I'm like, okay, but I can't just, I didn't not believe the person who told me, but in the position that I'm in, I can't just start accusing people of things that I don't have proof of anymore. I used to do that, and now I don't.
It works so well.
So I said back in May, is there anything you can get me? Is it still out there? Come to find out it was actually burned. But, I was like, can I access this somewhere online? And I went to one of those $25 sites, and all that came up was a public drunkenness and back in 2013, and it didn't pop up. So I just left it alone. And then a couple weekends ago was when I was tipped off, like basically somebody was really bothered by the way he handled himself on the After the Final Rose and said, you should really look into this. Here's a way to go get the documents. There are certain ththings about this case that are public documents. So you emailed me last week and you gave me your thoughts, and I was just like, oh, this is exactly what I need. Like somebody who knows what they're talking about in regards to this. So there's so many questions to dive into with the Devon situation. But the one thing I want to ask right off the bat is when you read the documents of this case, is there any way that this show shouldn't have known that Devon had a restraining order taken out against him 7 years ago?
So obviously the ideal answer is no, there's no way they shouldn't have known. This is really tough though, because there are a million small state court jurisdictions across the country that do not keep their records in a single comprehensive way. So I don't know enough about the Eastern Parish, in Louisiana that we're talking about to know if these documents really should have been caught on a background check. But I've also got to believe that an entity with this many resources should have the ability to search for criminal records in places they know these folks have lived, right? It was no secret that Devon lived there. They're doing, a show where there's really a lot of potential for problems if they're putting the wrong people on the show. And even if a single one-click background check doesn't find it, they should be doing more, in my opinion. They should be looking to places where these folks have lived and at least trying to run a basic check. And if you were able to find enough public records, so should they.
And, we find out after the story breaks, Deadline was the only one that reported it. From all the people, from Hollywood Reporter and Variety, they said that from their sources, they were told that on the basic search that I did pop up, there was something that showed, I can't remember what website it was, but it showed a burglary, didn't have a date next to it. But that's essentially what this was considered, the break-in to her place when she wasn't there. And the burglary, they asked him about it, and then he gave them an answer that was different from what we ended up finding out what it was. And it was almost like seemingly they took his word for it. Like he probably downplayed it like, oh, that was nothing. That was from back in college. And they just seemed to be like, okay, let's move on. Where maybe they should have dug in a little bit more at that point, because even burglary, that's kind of a big deal, right?
Absolutely. And this is something that on its face wouldn't have even necessarily been a domestic incident. A burglary is pretty serious. It's something that can be a felony depending on what jurisdiction you're in. And had they done even the most basic research, the burglary complaint itself would have been easy to obtain. And that is what led to knowing that there was a domestic violence restraining order history out there. And at that point, these documents were not ungettable. So at that point, they should have been able to get it. And it doesn't really make sense to do much of a background check if you then approach the subject and say, hey, can you explain this away? And they say, yeah, it was nothing. And you say, all right, cool. I mean, it kind of defeats the purpose of a background check.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the biggest things that people are discussing, and I know it's come up a few times, and I got a lot of people in the legal world messaging me after I said, look, when Devon gave his statement saying that restraining order was dismissed and it was never granted. Now that the wording there, I'd like you to kind of dive into it because you've seen all the documents and you've read all the documents. Obviously, you're an arbitrator, like you said, in family law. I want you to explain. To me, it seemed like verbal gymnastics that he was playing because the restraining order that she did file against him was granted because she had to. I believe it was. Maybe I'm off on this, but I believe it was granted. The first one that she
initially,
yeah, the initial one was granted, but what his answer was saying that a permanent one was never granted and it was dismissed, which he's not wrong about. But explain to the average person who doesn't understand this stuff exactly from everything you read in the documents what happened here.
Sure. And this was the reason, as you know, that I emailed you, because I think a lot of different places really botched what was going on. And you got it. You got it right. And basically what the procedure is in most jurisdictions, including Louisiana, you can go in and request what's called a temporary restraining order. And that is usually done without any notice to the person that you want a restraining order against. And it's kind of an emergency Band-Aid procedure. So what you do is you file a request for a restraining order, and two things happen. Number one, the judge decides, do I grant it or deny it today? Right? You're here today. Do I grant it today or deny it today? And that's only going to be temporary. That's only going to be for 20 days, 21 days, 25 days. And then I set a hearing for a permanent restraining order. And the reason that they do it that way is because the temporary order is almost always issued without the other party having any idea it's happening. So the decision the judge makes is effectively, if I assume that everything in this complaint, everything in this application is true, and give this person the benefit of the doubt, because usually they just file paperwork, they don't even see a judge. If I assume that everything they've claimed is true, would I issue a permanent restraining order? And if the answer to that is yes, then they go ahead and issue a temporary restraining order so that then the restrained person can be informed that there's a temporary restraining order, be informed that there's an application for a permanent restraining order, and have an opportunity to defend themselves. So Devon is just wrong that a restraining order was never granted. A temporary restraining order was absolutely granted. He's not necessarily wrong that there was no hearing or opportunity to defend himself against those allegations at the time. There almost certainly wasn't. I didn't see any proof that he was given notice that a temporary order was being sought so that he could have showed up and defended himself. So he's just wrong about that. With that said, what ultimately ended up happening was a permanent order didn't issue. And it appears that that's because one was not fully pursued by the complaining witness, by the complaining victim. So it's not entirely clear why she didn't pursue it. I know one of the explanations was she didn't want him to have a felony on his record. That doesn't seem to be true based on my review of the documents. But what we know happened is that they agreed to a stay away order that was mutual, that gave her something in hand that he had to stay away from her. And in California, that would be sort of less effective than an actual restraining order because it would not be the type of thing that police could enforce. But it's still a very common thing to do when you're kind of pursuing a restraining order, but you're not sure you want to poke the bear. And the other side says, I promise I'll stay away from you. And at the end of the day, any restraining order is only a piece of paper, no matter what kind it is. So it's not uncommon for someone to say, you know what, I'll go ahead and go with a mutual stay away order, save myself the cost and stress of a trial and see how it goes. So that's what appears to have happened here. I don't think it calls into doubt the veracity of her statements. I don't think it means we should disbelieve her about what happened. But, you know, it's very obvious that a restraining order was granted. And to suggest that one wasn't, and to suggest that they got back together afterwards, and so that disproves her allegations, I mean, it's silly. It's silly.
So, I mean, when it comes to TROs, I think a lot what you were saying was and again, not to diminish the victim's statements, but most of them have a very low burden of proof. And it's just, most of them are granted right away, right?
Absolutely. As long the standard is supposed to be, if what you're saying is true, you're entitled to a restraining order. Yeah. So it's really hard to not meet that standard, although people fail to meet that standard every day. But no, it's a very low burden of proof, and it's unverified allegations.
So when I was able to pull the warrant for the affidavit for his arrest, and we had the statement from the cop that described what he went through and what he saw, and is that just coming from the victim? When you read that, what did you make of that paperwork?
So basically, his statement is also based on the statement of the victim, but it's also based on some of his analysis, which I thought made a lot of sense in this particular case. More than just what she claimed, it was an investigating officer saying, I believed her to a certain extent, which is clearly relevant. But also, you know, it really doesn't make sense that somebody else might have done this, because the only items missing were items he gave her. Other items they attempted to clean them up. And the timing of this, it just really doesn't make sense that someone else burglarized her. So that's kind of the conclusions of an investigation. It's not definitive, but it's certainly more than just, she said it happened, therefore I say it happened. He did an investigation.
And then we saw the paperwork of her, which was, he has violated this 4 times, and she wrote out the 4 instances and dated them. Again, that was like initially, because I didn't have the original restraining order paperwork. Other outlets found that after the fact.
Right.
But she laid out, he's in violation of this restraining order. Like you said, restraining order is basically just a piece of paper. So when she wrote down those 4 instances where he violated that restraining order, I mean, it's not good, but what is if she wrote 10 things down? I mean, if she only wrote 1 thing down, does it matter how many times it's violated? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, what should have been the punishment here? Did you agree with the punishment he was given? Is that fairly standard? Did it matter how many times he violated? Like I said, once. She said 4 times. If she had written 10 things down, what is the thought process on that?
So basically, these are 2 completely separate issues, so far as I can tell. It seemed to me that the burglary happened and then the restraining order was sought. It doesn't seem, from my review of the timeline, like the burglary was a violation of the restraining order. You tell me if I'm getting my timeline wrong, and maybe I'll just pull up the document.
Yeah,
But
I think the restraining order was out there, because there was a box that was checked, and she said it in her writing, I already have a restraining order against him, and this is what he has done since. I can't have him keep doing this when I already have a restraining order out against him. That was in point number 4 she made. So okay. Yes, yeah, the restraining order was.
Because I am pretty sure. So the burglary happened, or the alleged burglary happened, because, you know, he pled guilty, so we can pretty much say the burglary happened, but yeah. I like to add the alleged in because I'm a lawyer, right? So the alleged burglary happened on March 19th, 2017.
Yeah.
Let's see. What I don't see is,
I guess we'd have to pull up the
that's what I'm doing. I'm sorry to do this while we're
the entertainment sites that found the initial TRO. They should have a date on when it was, but I've always been on the impression, because of what she wrote on that statement, that she filed on May 1st here, or yeah, it was May 1st, or filed on May 2nd. The 4th point she made, the last thing she says in there is like, I've already taken out a restraining order against this guy. Here's his 4 violations of it, or here's
right.
4
so
instances.
That's clearly a different document, right? So the police investigation is of a burglary. It's not of a restraining order violation. It's of a burglary of her home. It's a simple burglary of an inhabited dwelling.
Yeah.
It looks like in the affidavit for the arrest warrant that the officer subsequently learned that he did not have permission to be at her home. But I don't believe that the burglary itself was a violation of any restraining order. I think that is what prompted her to go and seek a restraining order. Either way, she alleged 4 violations of a violation of a temporary restraining order. That would be a really good basis to get a permanent restraining order, right? It's one of your best arguments. There was an order in place that he had to stay away from me for 2 weeks, and he couldn't even follow that, right? That's pretty much a slam dunk for a permanent order. But she didn't pursue the permanent order. So this is why, this is in part why the argument that I didn't want him to have a felony on his record doesn't make sense to me in terms of why she didn't pursue a permanent order. But with that said, there are plenty of very legitimate victims who are involved in a cycle of abuse who do not pursue a permanent order. And in many cases, you know, a permanent order is a piece of paper. It's not going to stop someone from entering your home. The only benefit that a permanent restraining order for her would really have over the stay away she agreed to is that if she saw him 100 feet away from her, she could immediately call the police and have him arrested if he was stupid enough to hang around. The stay away order she agreed to is a court order, but it doesn't, at least in California, and it appears in Louisiana, give the police an immediate right of arrest because it's not a document that leads to criminal violations on site. So this is, to me, a little murkier than it may have appeared initially. But, you know, it's really hard to know. I think that the arguments that have come out so far, particularly from him about why this should be disbelieved, are nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? Her story was very consistent in terms of kind of a pattern of abuse. And this is a lot of very specific stuff to make up. Not that it doesn't happen, but he also, I think, didn't really deny that these specific things happened. He issued a blanket denial that it's all false.
Yeah.
And then said, but it was a really tough relationship and a difficult period in my life. Not very cool.
Never went into details about anything, never specifically disputed. She said I went into her house when she wasn't there with a putty knife. No, I didn't. You know, it's like he never disputed any of that. He just kind of gave a generic rough time in my life, like you said. And it just wasn't believable at all.
No. So look, I don't have any reason to disbelieve what she's saying, but it is a little murkier. And honestly, these things always are. The restraining order process is really flawed in many ways. It's an important process to have, but it's a tough process because of the need to have immediate temporary orders, but the inability to really give justice before temporary orders are issued. It leads to kind of a lot of mess in a lot of situations. And I think this was one of them.
Yeah, and we talk about it when it comes to this show. I mean, it says on the application, you cannot be a contestant on our show if you've ever had a restraining order taken out against you. So whether or not they found it, Devon should have been, you know, look, maybe he doesn't read his contestant application. Most of them don't. They just want to be on TV. They just want to get on the show. But I also do know they sit you down during these numerous interviews you have to go to before you're put on the show as a contestant. And they ask you, is there anything out there that could get out that would make you look bad, us look bad, that we don't know about? And clearly he never told them, because you know what? I say clearly he never told them, but you know what? There's a part of me that's like, maybe they did know and just didn't care. You know, I don't know. I can't answer for them. Yeah. I would hope that they wouldn't, that he said, yeah, I had a restraining order out against me in college from an ex, and oh, she's crazy or whatever. But the second he said restraining order, they should have said, I'm sorry, we can't let you on the show. But I don't know. I don't know what happened in those conversations, you know? There's
no need to go there when you're on a show like this. And, you know, it's very common for people to think, you know, when applications say, have you ever been arrested? Right? They don't say, you know, have you ever been arrested? But if your arrest was purportedly expunged, you don't have to answer this question properly. And there are a lot of people that think, oh, if the temporary order was denied, I can just say I never had a restraining order. If, you know, he should have told them. Yeah. That's the purpose of the application. It's to alert them to anything that they need to look into. And he was clearly deceptive, I got to imagine, including based on what you're telling me on the application. I mean, I don't see a universe in which they would want to risk, oh, you had a temporary restraining order taken out against you, but not a permanent restraining order. No problem. Let's put you on the show and risk that this could happen, because it makes them look terrible. It makes them look like they're asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. And they certainly did seem to be asleep at the wheel for this. When you look at the punishment that he got out of this, obviously you've probably seen a lot of punishments doled out where it was just, hey, pay your court fees, do some, I think it was 30 hours, maybe it was 100 hours of community service. Don't get in trouble again, you know, get a job, stay employed, and stay away from her. Is that standard in something like this?
Yeah. This guy's not I mean, I guess he had the one arrest maybe for I don't know if that was before or after, for something that you found, a drunken disorderly something or other. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is not a habitual repeat offender, right? This is not somebody who, you know, has a history of criminal charges. He's, for all intents and purposes, a first-time offender. It's very possible, if they did reconcile, that the prosecutor lost their witness, right? So then they really don't have even a complaining witness who wants to testify. So I am not at all surprised that in a burglary of an uninhabited dwelling, which makes a big difference, she wasn't home. It's a huge violation. Don't get me wrong. It's terrifying. It's scary. It's abusive. But she wasn't home. Nobody got hurt. It doesn't surprise me to see that it would have been pled out to something like stay out of trouble for a little while and this goes away.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk about her, and you said you've dealt with a lot of cases like this where, you know, there isn't a permanent pursuit for whatever reason, getting back together, not wanting it on somebody's record, them just being scared about going through the process and having it play out in a trial. So you said this is common for it to get a TRO, but then not pursue anything further.
Absolutely. And the process of going to a hearing and sitting there and being cross-examined is very scary. And you're being cross-examined by someone, you know, assuming you're telling the truth, that you're being cross-examined by someone on behalf of the person you claim has abused you. It's a really scary process. And, you know, we also often tell people, you know, going and getting a restraining order against somebody who's really deranged and scary can sometimes make it worse. You know, I mean, we never discourage people from pursuing a restraining order when they feel they're in need of protection. But it doesn't surprise me at all that someone that's a legitimate victim would say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and agree to a mutual stay away order. I think that will do it for right now, and kind of take my chances. It also doesn't surprise me she might have gotten back together with him. You know, there are all sorts of statistics out there about the cycle of abuse and domestic violence and how many times it takes a person to leave an abusive relationship. So, you know, the argument, oh, but we got back together after that is pretty much the worst one.
Yeah.
Could be making.
Yeah. And it seemed like, you know, he didn't say like we got back together. He just said the wording that he used was we reconciled, you know, and it's just like, again, he didn't go into details. What does reconciled mean? Because everything that I heard behind the scenes was there was absolutely no reconciliation there. They're not friends. It's not like they ever really spoke as friends after this incident. So that's where he loses me with that. But yeah, it's just what a wild and wacky story. And it was crazy that I was able to get the documents that I was, because, you know, like I said, I kind of had forgotten that person had emailed me back in May, a couple weeks before the finale. And I just totally had forgotten. But that person even said at the time, the whole thing about he lit the restraining order on fire in her driveway. And that was mentioned to me back in May. And I was like, oh, wow. And then it did show up. She wrote that as one of her, you know, things in her statement that she had to make, in her handwritten statement. Yeah, you know, and there's a part of me that's like, I wish someday, it doesn't have to be with me, but I wish this woman would come forward. But I understand if she doesn't, you know, it's one of these things, you know, totally understand if she doesn't.
I mean, look at us. I think we're both pretty sympathetic, empathetic people. And even we're kind of sitting here tossing around like, well, she said this, but she didn't say this. I completely understand why she doesn't want to come forward. I think it would be incredibly brave, and I would commend her if she did, but I certainly can't fault her for not wanting to.
Yeah, because then, I mean, just the fact that it is out there again, she's having to relive it because she's very well aware of what people are saying. And she's very well aware that Devon, was just on a show. But again, none of this really is about her. And that's not to diminish anything that happened to her, but this is about Devon and his behavior. I mean, him just agreeing to go on the show is a slap in the face to her, because the second this guy is on the show and became a relevant character, ended up winning the season, again, like you said, he had to have known that there was, even if there was a 1% chance of this getting out, there was still a chance. And that was going to drag all this up for her,
It didn't really seem to me like he's the kind of guy that would worry about that kind of stuff. But, and what's really interesting is, I know that the time that they're portrayed to have together on the show, I obviously have no experience in reality television, although we say that the courtroom shows are the most real of reality television. The time they spend together is not that much, but if he was doing the type of things that she was claiming, you would expect to see red flags. And my guess is a lot of the early stuff that we saw even on the show, with his sort of overly effusive professions of love and it kind of fits a pattern that we see in domestic violence called love bombing, which is a very common sort of kickoff to an abusive relationship, where you have someone who is, going over the top to profess their love. And, who knows, right? I'm sure there's a lot we didn't see, but it'd be really interesting to kind of have a birdie behind the scenes tell us whether there were any red flags. And, if this kind of pattern of his is something that really is continuing now, or if this maybe was just, something that happened when he was very young, and you just don't tend to see that very often.
And even in the victim's notes, she had said, he came by my place, left a letter in my inbox professing his love. And it's just like, this seems to be almost his pattern, his MO. This is how he just rolls with women that he wants to be with. Like, he would just seems to be love bombing them. And she wrote it in her own notes that we read. It's just like, yeah, this is what he would do. Come over to my house, banging on my door at 4:30 in the morning or whatever it was. The time, just, it seemed to be, this seems to be his game, so to speak.
It's a common pattern, because as you can imagine, abusive relationships would not be as much of a thing, right? It wouldn't happen as much if the abuser was just mean all the time, right? I mean, that's the reason they call it a cycle, is because it goes down and it goes up. And oftentimes in these relationships, when it's up, it's really up, and it's over the top up. And then when it's down, it's really, really down. So.
Yeah. It was obviously a case that drew a lot of attention. The show took a lot of heat for it. We are a week and a half since this story broke. I want to say that I'm shocked that nobody from the network or nobody from the show, any executive producer, has released a statement attaching their name to it, specifically addressing the fact that they had a contestant who had a TRO filed against him in college. I say, like, I am surprised, but a part of me isn't. But like I said, here we are a week and a half later, still nothing. The only quote we got was when the entertainment sites contacted and they said sources close to the show. It's like, no, let's hear from the EP that runs the show and specifically address, did you miss it? Should you have dug further? What did Devon tell you? Did you ever question him about this burglary? And he said, yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Like, I think they have to, but considering we're 10 days out now, my guess is we're not going to get it. If they haven't addressed it by now, why would they address it in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I understand that Jones season is airing and they're underway for filming of Grant season, but still, this is one of the biggest stories in the franchise ever. And nobody is attaching their name to it. No EP come out and say, you know what, we screwed up again, but we vow to do better. Even if it's just something basic, we got to do better, and they haven't even said that.
Yeah, maybe we've got to do better, but I can't really imagine what statement they would give that would help, because either it's we screwed up, or our processes were flawed to begin with, or it's something like, well, we asked Devon, but he assured us it wasn't a big deal. That's almost worse. I don't think there's any way to clean this up. So
what about just saying, because I know for a fact that they hire a third party that does the background checks. It's not NZK, which is the production team behind the show. They they farm it out to a third party. What about just saying we missed the boat? You know, some paraphrasing here, but we missed the boat on this. The company that we have farmed it out to that does our background checks, they have since been replaced after this incident. Vow to do better going forward. I don't know, something like that. Just tell us you've done, because just saying we're going to do better in the future is so generic. It's like Devon's generic answer. It's so generic. What are you doing to do better? You know,
you should do their crisis comms. I mean, that's probably the best thing they could say, right? Is shift it off on a third party, keep it generic enough, right? But then say throw somebody else under the bus. I mean, that's, you know, probably the best thing they could do. My guess is they're not going to replace their background check company. I don't know. I don't know what the calculus is over there. Maybe this brings more attention to the show.
Yeah.
That's the other kind of cynical view of it, right? This draws attention, and I don't think it's going to lose viewers. I don't think people are going to say, you know, I'm boycotting the show because they let this guy on. It's going to draw more eyeballs. So, I mean, I guess that's the cynical view of it.
At least in droves. There'll be the occasional spotty person here and there that says, I'm not going to watch. I'm talking about, like, are you going to lose 50% of your audience from this? And the answer is no. I hear this every season about, just before we found out about the Devon stuff, people infuriated about how they treated their lead on the After the Final Rose, making her watch a proposal after she sat on the couch for 2 segments, bawling her eyes out. And then let's go back to that day. This was a very empowering moment because you proposed to Devon. No, we didn't need to see that. She didn't need to see that. And everyone was upset at that. And that was before this came out. And people are saying, I can't believe they don't protect their leads like that, how they could hang her out to dry like that. And it's just like, but you're watching next season. Let's be honest.
Right. And what it does, I mean, I'm kind of a perfect example. I am a fan. I do not watch every episode of every season by any means. It comes into my feed because of whatever algorithms there are. But when all this stuff about the finale and this stuff, I saw it all. And I would not have necessarily been following a season where all of this stuff didn't come out towards the end. So I think there are a lot of people, it does draw eyeballs when you have a big story like this, and it drums up interest. And I think you're right. The small number of people, God bless them, who would say, I'm boycotting the show because they shouldn't treat their leads like this, is not going to have a material impact on their ratings.
So before we move on to the next story that happened, I just kind of want to go back to your TV show. Of what is your shooting schedule with this? I mean, I hear about TV shows all the time where it's like, there's obviously, so I don't even know how many episodes you guys produce because it's a syndicated show. So it's airing everywhere at different times. What is your shooting schedule for this show? How many episodes are running in a given calendar year?
So we're direct to syndication. I think we have about 180 new episodes a year. We're on every day. And in most markets, we're on for an hour, and the first half hour is a new episode, and the second half hour is a repeat. So our shooting schedule, we shoot approximately 30 days a year. We were shooting today, as a matter of fact. And we shoot kind of in 2 or 3 day blocks, and we do 7 or 8 cases a day when we shoot. And they're long days. I mean, I ran from shooting to here. It's a long day. We spend much more time on each case than you see. So 30 times, about 7 on average is about 210. Some of the episodes are 2 cases if they're very simple. And then every once in a while, there's a case we can't use for one reason or another. So it ends up in about 180, 190 episodes a year. And it's a pretty relaxed shooting schedule. It's 30 days a year, 2 or 3 days at a time, which is the reason I also have a full-time law practice.
I was going to say, like,
it's a lot.
It's only 30 days a year for this show, yet 180 episodes. And you're like, wait a second. So what do you do for the other 11 months out of the year? And you say you have your own law practice.
Right. Yeah. I have 3 kids, a law practice. I mean, I have, one too many jobs somewhere, but I love them all. So for now I'm doing all of them.
And what are your kids' ages?
I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Okay.
So we're busy.
So now you're getting into whatever the sports, gymnastics, games on the weekends and stuff like that. And
my 9-year-old plays baseball and now water polo, which is, oh boy. And then my 7-year-old, who's a girl, does musical theater and dance. And then we'll see what the 2-year-old does. Right now it's terrorize us, but eventually he'll do something. So sports or, theater on the weekends. And I have a spreadsheet to try to keep track of where everyone needs to be after school. Right.
So, okay, moving on. This story with Devon happens last Monday when I broke it. And then 2 days later, Joan's season starts airing. And then a story breaks end of last week that one of Joan's contestants had a restraining order taken out against him. Now, I said this on my podcast yesterday, so for people that are, that missed it, and I think you and I kind of discussed this offline. Again, I don't want to diminish this woman who filed a restraining order against Gil, but I don't want to say they're two completely separate cases, or situations, but they almost kind of are because of the timing. With Devon had probably a month or two of going through a process to be a contestant on this show, and he had a restraining order 7 years ago on his record. Whether they found it or not, we both under the agreement they probably should have at some point found that.
Probably.
With Gil, his restraining order, for those that aren't familiar, was filed by a woman on June 11th of this year, and he left for filming days later. I don't know the exact day filming started, but I think it was right around the 24th. So there were maybe 13 days, so 2 weeks in there. And they had pretty much already completed their background checks of Joan's men. A restraining order is filed. And look, I'm the last person that's going to make excuses and for this show and say, hey, don't be so hard on them. But I'm sorry. I believe them when they say our background checks were already done. He left days later after this restraining order was filed. And I don't think the show works with us. They had 24 men on Joan's season. This was filed June 11th. They have their roster set to go. Let's say they left on the 19th or the 20th. I don't think on June 12th they go, okay, let's go down the list of 24 men. Has any of them been filed on any of the 24 men? Okay, June 13th. Has any of them been filed on the 24? Like Devon, 7 years ago, you had plenty of time to go find that. This, I'm sorry, I can't put this on the show. Not diminishing what this woman filed against him. She obviously felt harassed and stalked by him, but unfortunately, I think we have to chalk this one up to just bad timing for the show. I mean, it just came out right after the Devon stuff,
I agree with you. I think, you cannot be doing a check every single day up until filming begins. I mean, what if she had filed it the day before and it didn't make it into the system until after he'd already begun the show? Yeah. I mean, you can't really expect that level of search. On the other hand, all you had to do was type his name into the LA County's database and you would have found that. But, it's still tough, right? I think at some point you got to draw a line and your background check is done. And if it's a week before filming and something happens in that week, you chalk it up to bad timing.
And like we said with Devon was clearly dishonest or downplayed whatever happened back in college. He downplayed that temporary restraining order. With Gil, I'm sure they asked him the same thing. They ask everybody, is there anything that can get out? With Gil, as I explained in my podcast, he wasn't served his papers until August. So he didn't even know a restraining order was taken out against him from June 11th to whenever he left for filming. So he couldn't even tell them. We can't accuse him of what we're accusing Devon of, hey man, you weren't honest or you downplayed it or you flat out lied. Gil didn't even know. He didn't get the paperwork until August 11th. I have video of him receiving the paperwork because he evaded. Apparently he evaded a processor for a while, wasn't opening his door. And this was after he got back from filming, not saying before, because this is what the daughter told me, that they tried. And because he's a school teacher, he's actually an athletic director at a high school in Orange County. He wasn't in school. So they had to try and find out where he might've been. And he was never answering his door. And then I guess the original TRO, the time ran out because you said it's 21 days, 25 days, whatever. That ran out, so they had to refile. And then the daughter said, we were so sick of him evading and we couldn't get him this paperwork. And she told me, my boyfriend and I knew where he was doing yoga in a park one day, and I had my boyfriend serve him while I filmed it. And she sent me the video of her boyfriend handing Gil the papers at a yoga in a park one day. And that was and I asked her, when did this happen? What date was this? And she told me August 11th or maybe 17th, but it was in August. So he didn't even know that he had gotten a restraining order against him until August 11th or 17th, which was months after he had returned from filming. So again,
yeah, he wasn't dishonest. I mean, so what happened with Gil was they filed for a restraining order. The temporary order was granted.
Yeah.
They came back after the 21 or 25 days and said we weren't able to serve him. So they extended it for another 21 or 25 days. Again, very common.
Yeah.
And it's also very common to not be able to serve someone. You know, it's you don't want to, especially with a restraining order, let them know you're coming. So you've really got to find a time where you know where they're going to be, because a lot of people are not just going to open the door for somebody knocking, holding papers, or knocking and not telling you why they're knocking.
Yeah.
So after it was renewed, she went back to court and there was actually a hearing. The judge put her under oath and determined that they weren't going to extend the temporary order again. They were going to dismiss the temporary order, but without prejudice, obviously. They weren't telling her, we're not going to, ever issue you a permanent order, but we're going to get rid of this for lack of ability to serve him. Then she filed another one. She just filed the same restraining order, and it was actually denied on a temporary basis, which is really interesting. Because at that point, the judge who denied her temporary order was the same judge at the hearing who said, I'm going to dismiss this for lack of service. So he'd already kind of met this person, and she'd already testified before him. And he declined to order it on a temporary basis. Now, that could be any number of reasons, including because maybe she said he's off filming a show and the judge thought there was no risk the second time. Who knows? But now we're waiting. Now he's been served, and now they have their hearing on the request for a permanent order set for, I think, October. And
so the request for hearing is, so the first one was filed, it was given an extension, and the second extension was denied. So she refiled, but you said it was denied. So how are we having a hearing if her most recent one was denied?
Good question. So in California, regardless of whether your temporary order is granted or not, you are given the opportunity to come to court to seek a permanent order.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't matter. The court date is set automatically either way. In this particular instance, what happened was they denied it. They set their 21 to 25 day date. Everybody showed up on that date, including Gil with a lawyer. And apparently everybody decided they want to proceed with this hearing, right? Gil doesn't want to, stipulate to a stay away order. Maybe she doesn't want to stipulate to one either. She doesn't want to let it go. So there's still no temporary order in place. But now the judge has said, okay, you both want a hearing, you get a hearing. We're not going to do it today because probably nobody's ready. Gil just probably got a lawyer. He wants a little bit more time. He's entitled by law to a little more time. And so we're going to set a hearing date, and it's basically a trial. And the judge made the standard kind of orders. You got to disclose your witnesses, exchange evidence, and come back for a trial. And, that one's in California. I mean, that one's in my kind of home court. So these are, the forms they filed are the ones I see every day. Very standard stuff so far. The only interesting thing is, if you remember the standard for getting a temporary order, it's basically if everything you say is true, can you get an order on a permanent basis? And this judge apparently said no to her restraining order the second time, which isn't fatal. It happens that people who don't get a temporary order are given a permanent order. But it's interesting because what the judge has in effect said is, even if I believe everything you say, you don't have grounds for a restraining order. So it may be that there's more that she wants to tell us. It may be that there's a backstory that just doesn't easily fit into a form. I don't know, but she's, I guess, serious enough about this that she's going to pursue the permanent order, even having not been given a temporary order the second time, which is an uphill battle for sure.
So the video I have of the daughter's boyfriend serving him paperwork Like, that's the restraining order, the original one, right? So he does have.
No.
He has been served. What has he been? That's the temporary restraining order?
So he was served with her application for a restraining order, the second one. That first temporary restraining order is gone.
Gone.
That one expired. It was dismissed by the judge, but it wasn't dismissed because the allegations were false or because he didn't believe her. It was dismissed because she failed to serve him. And due process prevents the judge from issuing a permanent order without the other party having noticed that it's happening. So what happens in California and in Los Angeles is you file your paperwork, the court decides temporary order or no temporary order, and then you have that whole packet of paperwork. And then you have to serve the person if you want to have a hearing for a permanent order. And that is true even if you didn't get a temporary order issued. So now he knows what her allegations are. He knows what she's seeking. He has due process. And now he gets to go for a hearing, which is his notice and an opportunity to be heard now.
So I guess we will just wait to see. This is just a story where it's like, okay, it's out there. We know that a woman is accusing him of just, I guess, constant harassment, phone calls, emails, showing up to places that she was at. That's what the stuff that I have read. I don't know if when you went into the details of this and looked at it, did you see anything that was, oh, wow, this is bad? I mean, that's all bad. Obviously, he harassed her in some way, but I didn't read everything. You did. What did you see in there? What did you notice?
You kind of summed it up. I think there were a lot of allegations about being at public places at the same time, which are always tough when you live in the same place. There were certainly a couple of allegations about repeated phone calls on a couple of occasions. It's not okay to call someone 24 times in one day, no matter why you're trying to get a hold of them, unless there's some extenuating circumstance. There also weren't any records of the communications. Normally, that's the easiest thing to prove is you slap on, your call log showing 24 missed calls or showing 100 non-responded to text messages, right? There's no reason to text someone 100 times when they don't respond to you the first 99.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of that, but she filed the papers herself. So it could just be that she didn't gather her evidence in time, and that's what she's doing now. It's definitely not the most outrageous set of facts I've ever heard or anywhere close, but the details are missing because these forms that you fill out to kind of describe them are very short. And that's kind of what the hearing is for, is to fill in the blanks. Why are these repeated phone calls a problem? Why do they keep happening? Things like that. And it's a public courtroom. So maybe someone will go in and listen. Who knows?
Yeah. You have a message.
I know. Not a reminder of something, Right.
Okay. That was interesting stuff about Gil. And like I said, it's just one of these things where really horrible timing because it literally broke 4 days after I broke the Devon story. It's just like this show just probably didn't need as much. They already had enough bad publicity with the Devon stuff. It was picked up by everybody. And now all of a sudden the Gil stuff is plastered everywhere. But I hope that people understand we are not defending the show. We are not saying we're not making excuses for the show, but this is a very different situation. They honestly did not know about this. And unless they literally checked every day from June 11th until whenever Gil appeared on the show, they wouldn't have known. And you can't expect any television show to be like, all right, we got 24 contestants coming on the show. They're coming here on June 20th. Let's check every day if anything's been filed in the LA court. It's just like, because not everybody on Joan's season is from LA. So what are you going to do? Go to 25 different districts and check?
Of course. And this is one that very easily could have been missed in a background check, not only because of the timing, but because if it was really just being processed, maybe the form didn't go into the correct system yet, and so even if they had run a background check closer in time, it still may not have processed this. And yeah, you can't really expect them to go searching his name in every jurisdiction in Los Angeles or in California to make sure there wasn't a restraining order filed on any given day between now and I would say the time he's off the show, right? What if they find it in the middle of the show? I mean, it's not defending them, but this one was a little bit more bad luck, I think.
Yeah. This has been such a great talk, and I'm so glad I got in touch with you, because I feel like I can go to you with any sort of legal stuff that now comes up in my world. The one thing, and it's crazy that you reached out to me about this, but the one thing that happened in this Bachelor Nation world that's literally been going on for over a year now is the Clayton Eckard situation. And obviously I would have loved to have you around at that point. And, we spoke a little bit about this before we came on, and I definitely want to have you on in a little bit to talk about the Clayton case, because your expertise is family law, and that's where Clayton's situation happened. It's part of a family law case. Yet, a little bit about it, but not the full story. And I can't expect anybody who hasn't literally been following every day for the last, 15 months to know every bit of detail, because it is so detailed and so crazy. The amount of blogs that she has written, where she literally has gone back on her story and incriminated herself by writing blogs, writing tweets, her lawyer writing tweets, the case happening, the judge deciding 8 days after the trial back on June 10th that I attended, which was fascinating. It was my first trial ever to attend in person. We got to sit in the what's the side room? What's it? Had a special
like a separate room, or just the audience?
No, so we weren't allowed in the court, but we were in the separate room because it was such a public case. There were so many people that were interested in it. They set us up in a public room where they had a flat screen for us to watch.
Overflow.
An overflow. Yes, the overflow.
Yeah. Interesting. So there were so many people. The gallery was full.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they only allow, and look, it was like, I think 2 benches inside the courtroom. So, and there was probably, how many of us were in the overflow? I'd say 30 to 35 people maybe in the overflow.
Trial.
Yeah. And it was just 2 hours. And, because her lawyer went first, put her on the stand, and she was on the stand for probably 50 minutes. And then they brought up her doctor, and then they brought up Clayton. Her lawyer never got to cross-examine Clayton, because after 2 hours, it was like, okay, this is it. Like, her lawyer, the biggest thing he needed to do was cross-examine Clayton. Yet Clayton's lawyer got to cross-examine Laura, and got to cross-examine their doctor witness, who they absolutely obliterated. And then Clayton gets up there, and his exam, his
interesting
was done by his lawyer. And then that's when the trial ended, because the 2 hours were up. And it's just like, that lawyer wasted so much time, because everything that Laura said up there and everything that she said to her lawyer when she was being examined by her lawyer, it's like stuff we already knew. It's like they retried everything that we knew from previous hearings. I'm just like, I don't get this. Why is he wasting time going over facts that I'm pretty sure the judge already knows about? And he never got around to cross-examining Clayton. Like, it just seemed like that was his bit. It's probably why he lost the case. He never even got to cross-examine the main witness, So
yeah, that's a big problem, right? In California, you can call the other witness as your witness on your side, right? And that's usually what people do first. They don't even want their client to testify. They want the other guy to testify first.
And he put his client up there. He put Laura Owens up on the stand, and she was up there at least 45, 50 minutes of the 2 hours. And he kept asking, Judge, where are we at on time? Okay, let us call up the doctor. And he calls up a doctor that hadn't even met Laura or seen any of the paperwork until that day. Like, it was just the most bizarre thing, the thing that he wasted time on. And then that's why when Clayton's lawyers cross-examined that doctor, like I said, they obliterated him and made him basically, I don't want to say a non-witness, but his testimony became moot because he knew nothing. It was just like, why did you bring this doctor as your witness when I shouldn't say he hadn't met Laura until that day, and he had never interviewed Laura ever. He was just going off of, I guess, what the lawyer had told him. And here's the paperwork about this case, but he had never sat down and personally interviewed Laura about her pregnancy. And yet he was their main medical witness. It's bizarre. But yeah, so anyway, what I want to do is I'm going to get you the main paperwork, because it's so much paperwork, but the main things that I think you need to look at for this case. And I would love to have you back on in a little bit to discuss this case, because I think you'll have plenty of things to say. The fact that I told you that the judge issued a 19-page minute, which everybody has said is just
unheard of.
unheard of.
Like this.
Recommended her to the Arizona Maricopa County prosecutor's office. It's being investigated now. She is being investigated for if they're going to pursue criminal charges against her, which coming out of family law, again, you could probably say unheard of.
Never happens. Never happens. The DA would be busy all day long if we were about criminal activity that was revealed in family law courtrooms. They would never,
they would, and there are people out there that are just like, there are, I get it for people that haven't followed this for the last 15 months and the amount of lies that this woman has told and the fabrications that she has done and time that she has wasted of the law enforcement in the state of Arizona. There are people like, there are murderers out there. There are rapists out there. Why would they? And it's just like, maybe they, they're going through the investigation right now. They might just say, look, we're just not going to pursue it. We interviewed people and we're just not going to pursue anything. But there is a chance. And I think there are a lot of people out there that if you really dug into this case, this woman should be made an example of. And yes, maybe she didn't rape anybody and maybe she didn't murder anybody. But she still committed what I believe criminal activity in her past. And I think it definitely needs to be looked into. And I think that she needs to suffer consequences other than $163,000 that the judge ruled that she owes Clayton and his legal fees, which she'll never pay in a million years,
Yeah. And, one of the main purposes of punishment is not just to punish people, but it's deterrent effect. So there's a really good argument that it's not wrong to make an example of someone. It's right. It's one of the reasons that we have punishment. And, what it sounds like she did to him, and I know a little bit, but not enough. It sounds outrageous, and it sounds like something she may have done to other people. And so making an example of her might be something that actually the criminal justice system should do. We'll see.
I was going to say, as a judge, did you ever do that? But then again, you say you're an arbitrator. So
no criminal activity. I mean, lots of criminal activity, right? Just today we were filming, there was welfare fraud, there was Section 8 housing fraud. I mean, we see a lot of criminal activity, but we don't do any criminal law. We don't have a hot bench jail. If we did, it would be full. So this case is really, I mean, it's crazy because the first time we heard about it, she had released her statement to the Sun. She gave told the story to the Sun because she said, I'm pregnant with twins. Clayton Eckard is the father. And in the state of Arizona, you have to come up with a parenting plan. And this guy won't respond to me. I need to know what to do with these children. And Clayton, come to find out, was just like, yeah, because 1, I don't believe you. 2, I don't believe you because I never penetrated you. We never had sex. And 3, even if by the craziest act of God that you happen to be pregnant, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't want to be with you. So why are we working? Why do you need this parenting plan? And just the emails that she sent him. I mean, you will be. Yeah. Well, number three, he doesn't get to do, right? But it sounds like number 1 and number 2. I mean, he doesn't get to just, I don't want to have anything to do with you, but.
But if she was never pregnant, he does. That's his whole point is, yeah.
Of course not. And, the little bit that I have heard has centered around, the DNA testing, and there wasn't even a fetus in there. And so I'll read everything and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about, because everyone is very happy with Judge. Her name's Judge Mata. Everyone is just thrilled with the way she just laid the iron fist down in her judgment and was very, very thorough of, hey, look at all these things that you just, I'm sorry, I don't believe a word that you say, is essentially what the judge said in her judgment.
And she didn't have to do that. I mean, these are so overworked. Their minute orders are usually 1 paragraph that the clerk types up.
Yeah.
And clearly she took the time that she probably doesn't have to, go through and create a record for appeal, potentially for criminal prosecution. And that's a real big thing for a judge that is overworked and, underpaid to do.
Yeah. It's really fascinating to see where this goes. It's very possible that the investigation leads nowhere and they don't pursue criminal charges against her. It's very possible. We have no idea. I don't even know what the percentage is. Is it 50-50? Is it 75-25 that she does or doesn't? I have no idea because I don't really know what's going on with the investigation. I just know an investigation is still ongoing. I know the Attorney General in Arizona was asked about it in a press conference recently. She addressed it and said, We are looking into it. We're very well aware of the magnitude of this case, the popularity of this case, because it took on a life of its own.
Yeah.
This isn't just, a girl tried to, a girl claimed she was pregnant and she wasn't. I mean, that story seems to be as old as time. It seems to happen a lot. It is a pattern of abuse, a pattern of constant, like I said, this is the third time this has happened. She has claiming 3 or 4 miscarriages in her life from 3 different men, all of which she has protective orders against. It's just like, if you have 3 protective orders out against men that you all claim got you pregnant and you lost the baby all 3 times, I'm sorry, you don't get the benefit of the doubt from us. There's too much fishiness here.
And it sounds like this may be the first guy she went up against that had the resources to shut it down.
Well, that's
what it sounds like.
We didn't know. The other 2 guys basically had to acquiesce and just say, I don't have, they weren't on reality TV shows. Nobody knew about those 2 guys until this case became public. And then all of a sudden, those guys and people that knew them came out of the woodwork and said, she did the same exact thing to me, dude. So Clayton, the 2 men got in touch with Clayton and they've all become best friends. This was crazy. You probably don't know about this. On the day of the court hearing on June 10th, both of those men that she had accused in the past that she has protective order against showed up at the court, and her lawyer called the Scottsdale Police Department and said, these guys shouldn't be here. She has protective orders against them. And the judge is like, they are witnesses. They were going to be called up in that day. And he's arguing something that even if they're called as witnesses, they still can't be within because she has protective orders against them. And the judge, again, shot her lawyer down and said, absolutely, they have every right to be here. The police showed up that day because he called 911. But when the judge, because he went to the judge in the morning and said, these 2 guys should not be here, she said, they're witnesses of Clayton. And then he ended up calling 911. Police came out and police were just like, what do you want us to do here? They have every right to be here. And he's like, well, because they were given PTOs PRO, permanent restraining orders in California, because these 2 men were from California, they shouldn't be in Arizona. And judges like, they're witnesses, they're allowed to be here. So
and legal proceedings are always an exception. Otherwise, somebody that had a temporary restraining order could never go to court against someone and get a permanent one because they couldn't be in the same courtroom. And everyone kind of knows when you're sitting in court, by the way, with a bailiff right there, in the courtroom, that's almost always an exception to a restraining order. And if it isn't in a particular instance, some other arrangement is made so that the testimony can still be obtained. They don't just have to stay away from a proceeding which they're witnesses.
And I think, again, like, I know this is so like layperson of me, but to be like, do you honestly think in a court of law that these 2 men, I understand that you got a protective order against them and you fear them. What do you think they're going to do sitting in a courtroom with a bailiff there? Do you honestly think they're going to harass you from sitting in it? Like, it just, but again, this is her. This is what we deal with her. But yeah, it was a wild scene. It was fascinating sitting there in the overflow room, watching the case. She got flustered a couple times because apparently there was a couple times in the overflow room where we reacted rather loudly. There were laughs because of her testimony. And I guess that seeped through the walls and she got a little flustered because she heard us laughing in the overflow room and she started crying on the stand. It was just wild. It was wild, but I can't wait for you to read all this stuff. And I can't. No,
I'm excited to dig into it now because I saw some headlines. It was like, what is going on? And these things pass by. So I'm excited to dig into it.
Yeah. Craziest thing. I mean, who would have, this guy literally had a one-night hookup that didn't involve sex with a girl on May 20th of 2023. Nobody, including him, ever would have thought in a million years we'd be at where we're at now and what he has gone through for the last 15 months about this. It is batshit crazy. It's one of the most insane things I've ever seen. But yeah. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. This was so much fun. I definitely think you cleared things up for a lot of people in regards to the Devon situation, the Gill situation, and definitely going to have you on soon again after you get the correct paperwork that I'll send to you in regards to the Clayton case, the pertinent stuff that you need, because there's no way you can get caught up on 15 months of stuff. It's just
no. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. Check you out on the Hot Bench syndicated show. There's different times in different cities. I'm sure you've seen the commercial for it. I know I've seen it. It was crazy when you reached out to me. I was like, I know I've come across that show. I've watched it here and there for like 5 or 10 minutes, but obviously I didn't know the names of any of the judges. So when you identified yourself, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen that show, but, and it might have been in
reaction. It's like, oh yeah, I know that. I know you.
And it might have been when I was sitting getting my tires rotated at the car dealership, something like that. Like when it's in.
We got a big presence in auto body shops. Maybe the dentist. That's
dentist. Like I was just like, I know I've seen this show on with the 3 judges up there, and but yeah, I again appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, and obviously we'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
Bye.